Greetings everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. I'd like to thank the reformed members of the channel: Les Crispin, Tammy Slayton, CAG, Interscare Wifey, Denise S, Through Scrutiny, Samantha Place, Stephanie McLaren, Corpse Lover, Norman D.W., Christy Elliott, Cindy Cleveland, and Patty's niece. If you would like to become a member of the channel or buy me a coffee as a special thank you, that information can be found down below. If it's your first time here and you like what you're hearing, or you've already been here, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Not only does it help the channel, but it also reminds you of every time I upload a video. With that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in to get warm and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Night Shift Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Years ago, I used to work as a security guard in an abandoned site complex that is now a heritage listed site. At the time, there was a company trying to sell the land, so one other and myself was employed to run the graveyard shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., to make sure kids didn't sneak in and burn the place down and generally just mess it up. One night at around 2 a.m., when it was quite dark, the other guard and myself did our hourly patrol. Whilst he circled counterclockwise, I went through the center of 4 different buildings to check for holes in the fence. While I had my torch, I saw a young lady who couldn't have been more than 22 to 25 years of age and quite pretty, although a little disheveled. She approached me and said that she was trying to find some men who had taken something from her. Of course, being the only one around, I asked her if there was anything I could do, including phoning the police to come by. She declined with a short smile and seemed pretty despondent. Figuring that she might try and hurt herself, I said that I was here if she needed help, but it was a dangerous area, so I would escort her out. At this point, she gave one of the most blood-curdling screams I have ever heard. Tears streamed down her face, a quicker change of mood I have ever seen. Taken aback is the least of my feelings. She screamed, "I'll find them! I'll find them!" before sprinting behind one of the buildings. Took me half a second to gather myself, but I started after her. Now, I seriously thought that A, she would harm herself or someone else, or B, drugs are a hell of a thing. She disappeared behind one of the buildings, and not half a second later did my partner waltz out from behind that same building. He had not seen anyone run past nor heard anything. That scream was loud. Long story short from here, it turns out that this ward was functioning before any of the normal guidelines came into force, and it was obvious people there were treated worse than animals. Apparently, it was not unheard of for female psych patients to become pregnant, who knows where from, and subsequently their babies were taken from them at birth. I quit the next day, as did my partner. Nightclubs for me, thanks. This happened about 3 years ago, but I stumbled across this sub and thought you guys might appreciate my story. I worked as a correctional officer for about 5 years in an old county jail. One night while I was doing my rounds, I entered our high security unit. This unit was mostly for unruly and dangerous inmates who often liked to fight others or who had high notoriety cases such as murders. It was about 11 o'clock at night and the lights were about to go off for the evening. In this particular unit, a lot of inmates would stand at their doors and watch the dayroom TV from their cells since it was a solitary housing unit. I finished my rounds downstairs and I began climbing to the top tier. I glanced up at the near cell and saw an inmate watching TV from his door. I looked away for a moment and looked back, and he was gone. I walked up to the cell and looked in. The cell was completely vacant. My stomach dropped. I had heard from my coworkers and inmates often that the jail was definitely haunted, but this was my first personal experience with anything of that nature. I finished up my rounds and returned to the sergeant's office, where I told them about what I had experienced. Very calmly, he asked which cell it was. I told him number 7. He told me that about 15 years prior, an inmate had killed themselves in that exact cell after he was charged with the murder of his child. My sergeant was a younger officer at the time and was first on the scene. He told me that he truly believed that the inmate was framed for the murder and that the mother was the truly guilty one. This story gave me and still gives me the chills. Before my dad became a state police officer, he had some security work at a big factory. He's not normally a superstitious person, so when he told me this story with such a weird seriousness to it, it kind of scared the shit out of me. He's always said, I don't mess with that stuff regarding supernatural things, but anyway, this story is in the early 80s. With working at a factory, he always had the night shift. It was just him and the big-ass factory. He had his own little room where he could watch TV, listen to the radio, or do whatever. But the rest of the factory, for the most part besides the exits, was dark. His job was to actually patrol the factory every hour. He'd get up, grab his flashlight, and just stroll around the place, going down row by row, peeking his head out left to right. One night, he set out to do his usual run, with flashlight in hand. But he could see that something was unusual to his eye when he walked out into the dark. You know that sensation you get when your eyes adjust to the room and you can just start to make out certain objects, but nothing full or whole? There was something darker in the main hall or row, and it was moving. He paused for a minute, and as his eyes fully adjusted, there seemed to be nothing. He took a second to swipe the factory with his light, and then decided that he was just seeing things. He went down into the main row and started his run. Everything was normal, nothing out of the ordinary, although he was still a bit on edge, seeing as the factory without a big moving shadow was creepy enough. When the rows of the factory ended there was a big open area at the end. This was the entrance to the factory. Normally, there would be a light at the front door, but tonight it had dimmed to lower. He thought that was weird and really began to sweat. So instead of investigating any further, he turned from the exit and went to go back into the main row and get back up to his room. That's when, in the corner of his eye on the right side, he could see what he described as a black cloaked figure. His light hit it and he saw it, tall and distinctly human-like. But he didn't stop. He just went right back to his room, locked the door, and stayed in there until it was light out. He left the factory and called the owner to tell them he wouldn't be returning to the job. I most certainly do not blame him. I work at a golf course. I work behind the food counter. There is only one girl that works behind the food counter at a time. There is me and 6 other girls that work there. That's it. The rest are all men. Most of the older men have made an attempt to hit on me. and they joke about it but never say anything bad. Nothing outside of, "You're so pretty," or anything like that. One guy, however, has stuck out. I started working there this past May, and this one older guy, probably mid-60s, knows my aunt. So we kind of get along. A few months passed without an incident. He befriended me on Facebook, and I didn't think much of it. Then he made some weird comment to me twice. Okay, first off, he started talking about his daughter's ass. Then he said, "You have a small one compared to hers," twice. And I was like, okay. And since then, I haven't turned my back on him. I posted pictures on Facebook with one of my friends. We were at a water park and in bikinis. That guy came into work the next day, asking about her. "Who's that girl in that bikini with you?" And he asked her name and how I met her. I refused to give any real information about her. Then, not long after, he started asking questions about relationships I've been in, like how long they lasted, how old I was, etc. Then one night, he followed me to my car. It was pretty dark out. It was a little after 9 p.m. I parked pretty far away. I carry a taser, so I had it in my hand as I was walking. There's a bar across the street, and we allow people to park in our parking lot when there's no parking left at the bar. I was about 5 to 10 feet away from my car when I heard somebody say, "Hey," right behind me. I whirled around and had my taser ready. He started asking all these questions about my car. My car did have some issues a few months back that I told him about, but they've all been fixed. I also told him that he walked over to my driver's side door and started looking where I used to have a dent. I got into an accident and had a dent in the winter. I basically said, "My car is fine, I'm leaving," and jumped in my car and then sped off. I got so fed up, I told some of the other workers and my supervisors. I found out customers have been complaining about him, and he sometimes harasses the women that visit there. Most of the other workers don't like him, especially the girls that work at the counter. He takes golf balls too. The season just somewhat ended, and I've heard a rumor he's not coming back next season. So, to the creepy guy, I hope I don't see you ever again. I was 16 at the time, working as a shift manager at a frozen yogurt place. I typically would close up shop alone. Don't ask why. The owner thought it would be a good idea for a 16-year-old girl to close a yogurt shop by herself at 10 p.m. and all alone, and handled all of the closing work, counting registers, separating tips, cleaning up, etc. About 20 minutes before closing time, alone in the shop, a man walked in and immediately gave me a creepy vibe. He was dressed in dark clothing, didn't make any eye contact, and didn't say a word to me. He paced around the shop for what seemed like hours. Realistically, it was only a minute or so. We had an emergency button on our register that we were instructed to push in the event of a robbery or emergency situation. To me, as a 16-year-old girl alone in a frozen yogurt shop with a man pacing around in silence, in dark clothing, around closing time, this constituted an emergency situation, so I pressed the button. Immediately after pressing the button, I asked the man if he needed something, to which point he said, "No. No." I was preparing myself at any point for him to pull out a knife or a gun, but thankfully he began to leave as law enforcement was pulling up. Just as he walked outside, law enforcement were exiting their vehicles. He took off running. They nabbed him, questioned him, and placed him into custody. Long story short, as I was told by the deputies, He had just finished robbing the subway next door about 30 minutes before he came into my shop. They were uncertain whether or not it was his intention to rob me as well, but thankfully, because of the swift action of law enforcement and them already being in the area because of the previous robbery next door, that didn't happen. So, to the creepy guy, pacing man in the yogurt shop at closing time who didn't say but 2 words, I hope you're enjoying that little jail cell of yours. I work in an office in the Midwest. We have some cameras that are being set up. The whole setup is mainly in my office. This guy is one of those middle-aged men who has to make a show out of everything, tossing used cables in the trash with a weird motion, trying very hard to get me to talk to him by making comments about what he was doing, the weather, etc. He's talking really loud on the phone, looking over to me and just smiling. I don't really engage because I don't want to. He's like twice my age. I'm 26, by the way. He then starts talking about his daughter, saying like, "You look so much like my daughter, but older. She lives with my ex-wife. You guys could pass as sisters." Then he starts asking me more direct questions, so I'm giving short answers. I'm not really being impolite, but I'm busy with work. "Do you live around here? How do you like it here? So, do you like your job? I bet someone as pretty as you has a boyfriend." Then he gets real creepy. "I wished I had a pretty girl like you keeping me company. Is your boyfriend older than you?" He is by 2 years, by the way. "Do you like older men?" So now I'm creeped out because he's already told me I look like his underage daughter, and now he's being flirty with me, leaning on my desk asking me, what's the oldest guy I've ever been with? I told my boss and she's just like, he's just making conversation. But it wouldn't really be a story if it ended like that, and I wouldn't waste my time with typing this out. Weirdo sends me a text on Facebook asking if I wanted to hang out sometime, saying, "I know you can't really talk since you are at work, so let's go out." I go by a shortened name than what's on my Facebook, but my business cards have my full name, which means he took my card to find me on social media. My manager finally is taking this seriously and called to tell the company we want another man to work on our equipment. Thankfully, I do not work there anymore. I'm a guy, mid-20s, living in the US. This happened a few months back, and I'd like to write about it now and share it with you. About a year ago, I decided to quit my corporate job for several years. Long, short story, I was absolutely miserable and I needed a serious change. So I dipped into my savings, packed up only my most necessary belongings, and moved from my hometown on the East Coast to XYZ city, some 2,000 miles away. An impulsive decision for sure, but one I don't regret. My first month, I sputtered through a series of odd jobs, casually drifting from one gig to another as I tried to figure out what I really wanted out of my life. Eventually, an acquaintance suggested I try bartending. At the time, I had no experience at all, but I thought, to hell with it. Why not put myself out there? Couldn't hurt to try. I applied to all the LGBT bars in town. Yes, I'm gay. I figured that a job at one of these places would be a good way to integrate myself into the community. Maybe even meet some guys without having to escort to Grindr and the like. I quickly hit it off with the owner of a neighborhood pub, and he hired me on the spot, promising to mentor me in all things booze related. The following months were some of the best of my life. Met a lot of good people and gained a lot of perspective. I'm now starting grad school, but I still work at the same bar a couple nights a week. That's where the following incident occurred a few months ago. I should make mention that this bar is on the corner of a main road in a quiet side street. That's important. Anyways, around 5:45 p.m., I parked my car halfway down the side street, which at that time was lined with cars, and I walked back to the pub. After taking some deep breaths and doing some quick mental prep, despite the nature of my job, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool introvert. I walked through the front door, tossed my car keys into my knapsack, and tossed my knapsack over the main bar. It's my routine, what I always do. Only bartenders are ever allowed behind the bar, and I've never really felt the need to lock my personal belongings in the back office. It's just not that kind of place. Almost all the patrons are quality people, hard workers, community members, younger, older, everything in between, people who eventually deserve a break every now and then, if only in the form of a cocktail or three. That being said, it's not Cheers. Admittedly, this job has really made me wise to what so many women must have to endure on a regular basis. Not everyone is disrespectful of personal boundaries, especially when you're new, fresh meat. I've been leered at. I fucked. I've had guys reach out and rub their hands through my hair, stroke my chest, squeeze things, forcefully pull me closer and whisper to me all the things they'd like to do, only to get righteous and angry when I don't enthusiastically reciprocate. My first week, my boss told me half-jokingly that this is a gay bar. There's no such thing as sexual harassment. I guess because they're dudes and I'm dudes and we're all dudes, I'm supposed to man up and deal with it, which for the most part I do and did. The money's consistently good, but I still can't say that I'm entirely comfortable with it. Double standards suck. Anyway, Monday evenings can be hit or miss. That one Monday was a miss. By the time 10 p.m. rolled around, only a couple of folks remained. That's when Byrne walked in. I'd guess that Byrne was in his mid to late 30s, solid build, clean cut, average looking, sort of impeccably anonymous. I'd never seen him before. He sat down at the end of the counter, on the very last stool, next to where I enter and exit from behind the bar, and where I usually leave my belongings. He ordered a soda and introduced himself, and made small talk for a few minutes. He seemed to be a pretty affable guy, and nothing about him seemed explicitly out of the ordinary. But admittedly, something about him just didn't sit quite right with me. He almost seemed like a little too ordinary, like conspicuously so. He was dressed up as dressed down, if that makes any sense. It's hard to describe. Think along the lines of someone who might spend an hour trying to style perfect bedhead. Anyways, at some point the topic got around to video games, in which I love. And for a good 10 minutes, we discussed some upcoming releases we were both apparently excited about. Eventually, I had to excuse myself to help another customer, as well as finish a couple of other tasks that needed doing. But Byrne said it was no big deal, and of course I needed to do my job. Cool, no problem. As I walked around the pub, cleaning this and that, I couldn't help but notice that whenever I stopped to look at Byrne's direction, he was already looking at me. This is something I've gotten used to as a bartender, but again, something in particular just doesn't sit right. Sometimes he would look away, and most of the time he wouldn't, giving me a tiny, impenetrable smile. This went on for a while, nearly 2 hours. I'd walk up to him occasionally, asking him if he needed anything, and we'd have a brief exchange. I'd go back to my other duties. He just kept on staring, so on and so on. And all that time, he only ordered one more soda, and he didn't talk to anyone else. He had the smartphone on the counter in front of him, but I never once saw him looking at it. As I said before, I've experienced worse, so I figured that he was probably socially awkward, or maybe just lonely. Whatever he was, though, he wasn't particularly subtle. By midnight, Vern was the only person still sitting in the bar. There were 2 guys playing pool in the back room, out of sight, and a few guys smoking on the patio, but Vern and I were the only ones in the main bar. In that sort of situation, it felt rude to not chat up the only person left in the vicinity. It's part of my job to make people feel welcome, after all. But despite it being a super slow night, I felt drained, and I just couldn't find the energy to strike up a genuine conversation with someone who was making me feel like I was on full display. I figured it would be a good time to go to the storeroom and grab a few cases of beer that I had to restock soon anyway. I excused myself and told Vern that I was going to the office and would be right back, but if he needed anything, he could holler. When I made it inside the office, I immediately felt a sense of relief, like I'd finally made it backstage after a gruelingly long performance. It took me about 30 seconds to grab the stuff I needed, but I decided to sit down and around on the phone for a few minutes, enjoying my solitude. I stayed there until it felt like I'd been away from my post for a bit too long, at which point I grabbed the beer cases and headed back to the bar. To my surprise, Vern was gone by the time I got back, and there was a $20 bill under his glass. I felt suddenly guilty, not because I'd just made money off of him, although of course that was appreciated, but because maybe he really was just some horny, closeted dude who didn't know how to interact with other guys. And maybe the money was his only reliable way of expressing gratitude for the company. Maybe I had misread the cues and was projecting my own insecurities onto his, admittedly, awkward behavior? Maybe. In my case, he was gone now, and I still had to do more stuff, so I placed the cash in my tip jar and mentally thanked him for it. I began going about my tasks for the rest of the shift and completely put Vern out of my head. A couple of hours later, at around 1 a.m., I escorted the final stragglers outside and closed the front door. I work alone on Monday night, so it usually takes me a little less than an hour to finish my tasks after closing. As per usual, I put on some chill music and went on autopilot. I finished everything at around 2 a.m. After turning off all the lights, I grabbed my knapsack, set the alarm, and headed out the front door, which locks on its own. I started to amble down the street towards my car, the only one left on the block. All I could think about was how badly I needed to pack a bowl and jump in the shower. When I reached the back door of my car, I absent-mindedly yanked it open and threw my knapsack into the back seat, slamming the door closed. I stepped up to the driver's side door and pulled the handle and climbed inside. Only as my ass made contact with the seat and I reached my hand toward the open door did I realize I hadn't taken my car keys out of my bag. I never actually unlocked my car. A wave rolled over me like I jumped into the ocean, and I saw something in the periphery of my vision. I kid you not. There he was, just sitting there in my passenger seat. I'm not at all ashamed to admit I screamed. The driver's side door was still wide open, but I didn't or couldn't move. I just stared at him dumbfounded. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, Vern said. I didn't immediately respond, so he quickly followed up with, I thought we could hang out, maybe play some games together. Then, like it was nothing, he handed me my car keys, which he had obviously stolen out of my bag during those minutes I was in the office, and apologized again, presumably for having my keys in the first place. Then he offhandedly gave me an address and said that he didn't live far away, if I was interested. I'd like to say that I was this close to grabbing him by the collar and beating the shit out of him, but something in my gut urged me strongly to play along, to pretend like this situation wasn't completely insane. The street was deserted. I had no idea if he was armed, how unhinged he was, etc. Too many variables. No worries, man, I said casually, like he was an old childhood friend who'd just flown into town to surprise me on my birthday. Just wasn't expecting to see you. I had no idea what I should say. It might have been a stupid decision on my part, and there were probably 1,001 things I should have done instead. But I tried to genuinely meet him halfway and just be as gracious as possible, as calmly as possible. That sounds cool, but it was a crazy long night for me and I'm really tired. Can we rain check? A few silent moments passed, but I suppose I sounded genuine enough because he crossed his arms and simply said, okay. I asked him if he had his car parked nearby, and he said no. I didn't press the issue further, and, again dumb, I told him outright that I'd be happy to drop him off at his place, at which point we could trade numbers and make plans in the morning after I'd gotten some sleep. Somehow appeasement seemed safer than flat-out confrontation, or running away, or suggesting Uber or whatever. I didn't want to offend him or make him feel like he was in the wrong. I had no idea what he was capable of, whether he was actually malevolent or just an alien from another social dimension. He quietly agreed to the ride. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. On the way, I asked him about how his day went and what games he liked and other random bullshit. I mentioned multiple times that I was really glad to meet another gamer and that it'd be fun to share the hobby with someone else. Basically, I said whatever it took to keep the conversation light and flowing, but he didn't say much at all aside from occasionally directing me left to right, and whatever he did say had a sort of petulant tone to it. I feel like I was driving home a psychotic toddler whom I'd just refused McDonald's. He looked out the passenger window the entire ride. Occasionally I would glance over at him, but mostly I tried to keep my eyes forward because I found that focusing on the road made me feel more centered. Of course, a part of me wishes now that I had acted more assertively, whipping around a sharp turn and sending him flying effortlessly out the window. You know, something badass. Or being friendly and accommodating was really the only thing that seemed appropriate at the time. My grandfather says, kill him with kindness, and I disagree that's always the correct solution. But it's what I did that night, and it worked. I considered driving directly to a police station, but I wasn't terribly familiar with the neighborhood, and I didn't want to rile him up by taking out my phone. Before long, we arrived. The destination was a small park in a suburb that I'd only driven through a couple of times previously. He said he'd walk the rest of the way, and at his request, I brought the car to a stop on the corner. There was a short, somewhat terrifying lull before either of us said anything or made any sort of movement. I offered to put my number in his phone, but he refused and simply said, thanks, and got out of the car. As soon as he closed the door, I hightailed it down the street. I drove aimlessly for about a mile before I pulled over and just idled on the side of the road. I sat in silence for a few moments and then called my boss, who at this point is a good friend. Honestly, I didn't care that it was after 2 a.m. at that point. He picked up after a couple of rings, and I quickly regurgitated everything that happened. He was a good sport about it and didn't just play it off for laughs. Instead, he expressed legitimate concern. We had a mandatory staff meeting that week in which everyone was told they needed to be on guard and how the bar would be installing several cameras for extra security. Thinking I haven't seen Vern again since that night, nor have any of the other bartenders. So Vern, I hope you don't come back in at my bar or anywhere else. I have bear spray now, and also actual bears. Okay, listeners, I'm going to insert my personal opinion here because I actually used to bartend. That story right there brought up some traumatic memories for me. That stuff happens all the time. If you've ever bartended, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, back to our stories. Some backstory. I'm a 21-year-old female, about 5'6" with glasses and blonde hair. This will come into context later. And I work at a hotel doing housekeeping. I used to work the food area serving breakfast and dinner, but I switched to back of the house about 3 months after starting. The story starts when I was still working up front doing food service. I come in for my normal shift as the diner attendant and started to make the food. While I'm working, my assistant general manager walks in. We'll call her Pam, holding a piece of paper. You have a secret admirer, someone named Bill the Taco Bell boy. He left you his number. I looked at her confused and asked why. I'm not sure. It was given to the manager on duty last night, and they asked them to give it to the tall girl with blonde hair and glasses. So I take the paper, threw it away because I had no idea who Billy the Taco Bell boy was. I continue on with my shift as normal and go home. The next day, I come in to be the breakfast attendant, and the manager on duty that had gotten Bill's number was there, so I asked her about him. Oh yeah, he didn't even get your name right. The only reason I knew he was talking about you was because he described you. I then asked her what he looked like, trying to figure out if I had talked to him before. He was probably about 50 and had glasses. He was short and stocky and reeked of alcohol. My first thought is, great, another creepy guy. I tell her that I've never seen this man she's describing in my life. She goes on to tell me he had checked out and I should be okay. Fast forward about a month and I've switched to housekeeping. The entryway to our rooms has tiles since it's connected to the bathroom area. And when we wipe them down, we usually do it on our hands and knees. One day I was wiping down the bathroom/entryway floor, minding my own business, listening to My 600-Pound Life, when I just feel eyes searing into me. I had my back turned towards the door, so I had to turn around and see if someone was there. I turn around to see this man, about 50, stocky and with glasses. At this point, I had forgotten about the whole Bill situation and didn't think anything of it. Hi, was there anything I could help you with? I asked in my customer service voice and a huge smile, standing up so I could actually talk to him instead of being crouched on the floor. You never texted or called me, he replied. I'm sorry, what was that? I asked, genuinely confused. He looks at me with the most serious face and asks, You don't remember? I'm Bill. I left you my number, hoping you would get a hold of me. Everything comes back to me now, and I'm kind of in shock and don't know what to say. I'm sorry, we aren't allowed to talk to our guests outside of work. It's company policy. Then why didn't your manager say? I couldn't give you my number. I had absolutely nothing to say back to this, so I just made up some bullshit answer to try and get him away from me. Oh, she's new and must not have realized it. I'm terribly sorry. Is there anything I could do for you, though? I asked, and now realize he's standing literally in the doorway of the room. No, just no, I'll never forget about you and that little lass as you wiped down the floors. And with that, he just walked away. Luckily, I've never seen this man again, but I now have a Swiffer that I put my rag on to clean our tile. I have no idea what would have happened if I had actually texted this man, but thank God I threw his number away, and also that he didn't try anything when he absolutely could have. Alright, here's an update now that I made it home, and believe it or not, but things did manage to get a little weirder in the last hour. Since it had been about 6 hours since anything had happened, I started to feel pretty normal again. Nothing 100%, but not cowering in fear either, when suddenly I hear a noise at the front door to the lobby. The lobby is shaped like a triangle, with the front desk and guard station at the base of the triangle, and the whole right side is a big window with the front doors at the far end of that side. I instantly run off the speakers to the computer and freeze. I don't move for about a minute and roll my chair over to the camera monitors. The display has 9 camera feeds and switches to another 9 camera feeds every few seconds, so I'm frantically trying to find one that corresponds to the front door. Now, there are some employees that start to show up between 5 and 6, but they all have key cards, so they come up from the garage through the elevator, and no one has ever tried to do this during the graveyard shift before. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably about 25 seconds, I find the feed and click on it to maximize, and standing in front of the door facing toward the camera, not into the building, is a figure in a black suit and a fearless face. I shit you not. My jaw drops. My heart races as the thought. It's Slender keeps going through my mind over and over. I immediately call my supervisor and tell him there is someone outside just standing there. He says he's 10 minutes out and he'll pull up to the front of the building. After an agonizing 10 minutes of staring at the feed and this guy not going anywhere, my supervisor finally calls me back and tells me to go to the front door as he walks up in case things get crazy. Turns out the guy outside was our new guard that no one told us was coming. I didn't know if I wanted to hug the guy or punch him in his face, but I was glad one of the weirdest nights of my life was over. We'll see how it goes tonight. Greetings, everyone. I was reminded of this story today. Here it is. I was sitting outside my work having a smoke. 4 a.m., not a soul in sight. A man came up to me, asked if I had a spare cigarette. I politely declined. Normally, this just elicits some grumbling, then they amble off. Not this night. Buddy decided to dig in his heels. He had all his earthly belongings on his back and a gigantic glass bottle of vodka that he started swinging around. He also had the kind eyes that give a lion tamer the heebie-jeebies. Not an ideal combination in someone who is getting up in your unarmed face. You better give me a smoke. No, dude. Sorry. I said, give me a smoke. You don't know who you're dealing with. He starts to loom over me, getting a bit too far into my space bubble. I stood up, all 5'3" of me. The only things I had going for me were steel-toe boots and a real bitchy look. The man backed up a step, then came back in even closer to me. He was directly in my way, back to the door. He took my motion as a threat, as he immediately ramped up his act. If you don't give me a cigarette, I'm gonna kill you. No one will find you. Look me in the eyes, woman. I am looking you in the eyes, I replied firmly, planting my feet and giving him my best graveyard shift stare. Anyone who's ever worked nights will know what that stare is. He kept insisting I look him in the eye, and I kept replying just as fast that I was all ready. And what was he gonna do about it? Don't try me. I'll drag you by your lady hairs to these bushes over there and the shit out of you. I'll you up. Getting still closer and holding the vodka bottle up. This is when I started getting really, really loud. Get out of my face. Back off. Back off. Get the out of here. In true predator fashion, he got nervous at the sudden yelling, and while he kept threatening me with all sorts of heinous things, was looking around quickly for any witnesses. This is when I knew I was in trouble if someone didn't come along. I cannot emphasize enough how creepy this guy was being. I've actually abbreviated most of what he said. Luckily, my coworker finally heard the commotion and came barreling out, already on the phone to the police. The man started threatening her too, then realized who she was on the phone with, and quickly walked away, slurring more insults as he went. The police came, and I gave a detailed description, but they never found him. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my coworker hadn't come out when she did. All I know is this: I hope I never see that drunken bastard ever again. This all happened when I was about 16, in high school and working my first part-time job at a fast food restaurant located right off the highway, and wasn't uncommon to get a lot of crazy customers. I arrived at work one day and was surprised to see that my schedule for the week had changed, giving me a graveyard shift on a Friday night. The thought of being at this place overnight gave me the creeps, and thought my manager was insane for making the youngest employee take a night shift. But it wasn't a school night, and I didn't want to seem like a baby, so I just accepted the shift. When night came, it was just me and another coworker, who was a larger man and very friendly, so I felt more safe with him there. Before leaving, my manager gave me the rundown on how the night was supposed to go. At 11 p.m., I was to lock the doors, and we would only be taking drive-through orders. But on this particular night, just my luck, one of the main doors had been broken and wouldn't lock properly. If anyone comes in, just tell them they can't be in the lobby and to order through the drive-through. You got it? After the words of wisdom, my manager went home to the comfort of his bed, and I started my long shift. Being slightly paranoid and not used to the new shift and every noise I heard from outside made me jump. A few times, some customers came in through the unlocked door, but quickly and politely left after asking them to use the drive-thru. When it reached about 1 in the morning, I was in the back of the store organizing boxes when I heard the slam of a heavy door close. I ran to the front to tell whoever it was to get out, but saw no one. I walked into the lobby and looked around, but didn't see anyone there. Did you hear someone come in? I asked my coworker, as he also came to investigate. Maybe they left, but I'll check the bathroom to be safe, he said, as he opened the men's bathroom, then quickly came back out. Nope, no one here. You should check the girls' bathroom, he advised. I agreed and opened the door to the women's bathroom. At first, I didn't see anything, so I called out, "Anyone in here?" No response. To double check, I took a few steps into the bathroom, and at this time, I was able to see some feet behind a stall. The stall door was wide open, and as I got closer, I was able to see inside. My stomach instantly sank. I caught eyes with a woman with long tangled brown hair, crouched next to the toilet with a needle in her arm. She jumped up out of surprise and ripped the needle out of her arm, squirting blood all over the floor. She raised the needle over her head and started to move towards me. I screamed and ran as fast as I could out of the bathroom and past my coworker. I whipped around just in time to see her run out of the door. My heart was racing and I was scared to death, and ended up going home right after. After all of that, I quit the next day. Before we get started, I would like to apologize as I'm not a writer, but I will do my best. Okay, so I work night shifts at a nursing home, so I drink coffee all night to help keep me up. This one particular night, my coworker and I were making our usual pot of coffee and noticed we didn't have any of our creamer left. We didn't like using the creamer from the nursing home. It wouldn't dissolve, so it felt like you had paper in your mouth. Anyways, I told my coworker I'd go get us some creamer from Walmart since she couldn't leave. Her being the nurse, she had to stay in case something happened, so I head over to Walmart. I live in a pretty small town, so there's usually nobody there at night, except the Walmart employees and probably like 2 other customers. So I'm over on the aisle with the creamers, and I hear 2 men passing by laughing and goofing off. I thought to myself, they're drunk or bored and have nothing else better to do, and went about my business. I head over to the chip aisle. I'm one of those people that go to the store and have to get a snack. Again, I see the same 2 men from earlier as I'm deciding what chips I want. One of them says to me, "Hey, what are you doing out so late?" Mind you, I'm a 20-year-old Hispanic girl. I stand 5'1" and only weigh about 96 pounds. I'm a tiny girl. I simply just ignore them. I didn't feel like being messed with, and I didn't have any coffee yet, so I was a little grumpy. The guy then yells out, "Can you not hear me? You no hablo inglés?" Arrogant, I know. I just rolled my eyes, grabbed a bag of chips, and left. I see them trailing behind me, but I'm on my way to the self-checkout, so I figured they were going to leave the store. Before I got to the self-checkout, I remembered I needed some more wipes for my baby. So I head over to the other end of the store to the baby aisle and notice the 2 men still following me, giggling. At this point, I'm annoyed and a little scared. So I rush to the self-checkout. As I rang up my stuff, I noticed the 2 men went to sit at the bench by the doors, not buying a thing. Just sitting there, looking at me and giggling. I'm very uncomfortable at this point and look around for a Walmart employee to walk me out to my car and make sure they didn't try anything. Luckily, the night manager was passing by just as I was getting ready to leave, and I asked him if he could walk me to my car. I tried to tell him about the men, but when I looked over at the bench, they were gone. We both thought they probably just left. He still walked me to my car to make sure I was safe anyway. I thanked him, locked my doors, and called my coworker to tell her what had happened. Thinking it was over, I head back to my job. As I'm leaving the parking lot, I see a truck behind me. I didn't think much of it until I started making turns and they were going the same direction. I'm just thinking to myself, great, what if it's those assholes from the store? As I reach my job, I call my coworker and told her to have the door open for me so I can just run in. You need a code to get in, and I usually need a good 2 tries to get it open, and tonight wasn't the night for that. As I got to my job, I see my coworker at the door, and I get out of my car and run towards the door. As I ran, I heard a man yelling from the truck saying, "Bye, mamacita, see you again soon." I turn around and notice it was the men from the store. They had followed me all the way to my job, which creeped me out, and had me looking over my shoulder the rest of the night. This all happened at 3 a.m. on a Thursday night. I'm not sure why they followed me, or what exactly they wanted, or if they were just messing with me because I ignored them. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out. So for starters, I work overnights at a hotel in a seedy area. I'm female and work the night audit. My personality is that of an unapproachable shrew with the looks of a sultry, overworked hotel employee. I'm currently awaiting the police to show up so I can make my statement. It was so sudden and abrupt, and I'm still shaking. An inebriated man was standing outside with his attractive girlfriend, having a cigarette, being loud and overall being disgustingly affectionate. I remember asking myself, why are you outside doing this when you just paid money for a place to do the exact same thing in? While they are doing this unknowingly to them, I noticed a man wearing an army uniform walking towards them at a very steady pace. The army man stops right next to the inebriated guy, puts his hand on his shoulder, which startles him, and says something. I'm assuming he asked for a cigarette. Regardless, the inebriated man stops what he's doing and starts to fumble around in his pockets. I guess the man had a cigarette because he went to extend his hand out to the soldier, and all of a sudden a red 4-door something speeds up around the corner like a bat out of hell. Stops right in front of the couple. The army guy pushes the man aside while holding the wrist, and the woman is pulled into the car, and then the inebriated guy is also thrown in. The soldier jumps in and then drives off. I observed all of this from my desk, and there was nothing I could do, no matter how fast I ran. No matter how quickly I could have gotten to her, would not have been fast enough with the situation that had just taken place. I'm freaking my shit, so I'm sorry for any grammatical mistakes. Let this please be a lesson to everyone out there. No matter how safe you may feel, you're not. So to the soldier and the people in that red car, I hope you got caught. Here's a quick update. The man is nowhere to be found, but the woman is in the hospital. She is safe now. They wouldn't give me any information other than they need to run tests on her and allow her to recover from her night before they can question her. They think the guy she was with was involved. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true night shift horror stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.